يا علي
يا ساكن بقلبي وعليك يظل نحبي يا بني الأكبر. يا ساكن بقلبي وعليك يظل نحبي يا بني الأكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الأعظم حجة الله ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا غريب الغرباء، يا مظلوم كربلاء، السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي. يا سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: إن الحسين مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة. صدق رسول الله وآمنا به. زينوا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. As the world transforms into a global village and new ideologies surface with every passing day, and the increasing pressure to coexist within a pluralistic society, the Shi'as of Ahlul Bayt, the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, are posed with objections over the issue of commemorating the majalis of Imam al-Hussein. Because the objection that comes forward by such individuals is that within a pluralistic society, within an advanced society, within a civilized society, the establishment of majalis such as these causes or is a reason for a barrier. Yani the majalis aza in itself is a barrier towards achieving the Islamic unity between the different sects that exist within Islam. The objection comes forward is that the establishment of majalis al-aza such as this is a platform for Shia propaganda. Through these majalis, other sects and followers or leaders of other sects are implicated, differences are drawn, and the ranks within the Muslims are widened and the ranks of the Muslims are dismantled. Therefore, the objection that comes forward from a group of such people is that majalis azah such as these are a barrier to the achievement of the greater goal, which is Islamic unity. We shall begin these blessed sacred nights of Muharram al-Mubarak by addressing these objections in a rational, non-violent manner, such that we can clear the misconceptions that accompany it with it. Starting with the loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first answer which is given to such an objection is that when the person comes forward and says establishment of this majlis azah for Sayyid al-Shuhada is a barrier towards Islamic unity, then we say to him upon the same istidlal, upon the same basis, if because we are carrying forward with an action which is particular to the madhab of Ahlul Bayt, and this particularity is a barrier to unity, why is not the same ishkal put in other aspects of ibadat? Why don't we say because some people do wudu starting from the elbow going down to the fingers, while others do wudu starting from the fingers up to the elbow? Why isn't this is this not a barrier towards unity? When we say some people pray with their hands down and some people pray with their hands folded, isn't this not a barrier towards unity? Why is the ishkal only put towards Sayyid al-Shuhada? Ulama of mantiq say that this type of a jawab is known as a jawab naqdi, which means when a person raises such type of an objection, you reply back to him with a similar question, with a similar type of objection, and through these objections you make that objection batil. For number one, jawabun naqdi, as the way the ulama of mantiq say. Number one. Number two, if a person comes forward and says that commemoration of Majalis al-Azha is a barrier to Islamic unity, then by default it becomes awla to say that the person who led the revolution himself was against unity. Now if you say that commemoration of Ashura is a barrier towards unity, then the revolution of Ashura, the revolution of Karbala in itself was a barrier towards unity. And according to the mantiq of these people, if they come forward and they say that Imam Hussein split the rank of the Muslims and they put an ishkal against Imam Hussein, we say to them, Ya Habibi, if you question the judgment of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you have questioned the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because Imam al-Hussein is a ma'soom Imam. Based on what? Verse of the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. Entire scholars from the madhab of Shia and outside the ranks of the scholars of the Shia are unanimous in saying that Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussein ibn Ali, was one of the people according to whom this verse of Tathir was revealed. Therefore, the judgment of Sayyid al-Shuhada is infallible. Ma'soom Imam has been granted this status by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Infallible in his judgment. If you pose an ishkal on Imam al-Hussein, you have posed an ishkal on the very Lord of the universe who has given Imam al-Hussein isma'. Furthermore, this is the mantiq, this is the kalam of Ibn Ziyad al-La'in. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, when he captured Muslim bin Aqil in Kufa, rahmatullah alayh, he brings forward Muslim bin Aqil. What does he tell him? He tells him, Ya Muslim, enter, you are the person who has dismantled and disunited the ranks of the Muslim in Kufa. For Muslim bin Aqil looks at him and tells him, you disunited the Muslims when you accepted to bring forward Yazid and his father Muawiyah as the Khalifa. For Imam al-Hussein as a revolution is not an aspect or the ishkal that comes forward that this commemoration is a barrier in itself is a fallacy because it raises an ishkal towards Allah. Number three, when this person comes forward or when an objection is raised that establishing majalis al-aza causes disunity, we say to him, this in itself is a fallacy. Ya Habibi, it is not only the Shia who are commanded to love Imam al-Hussein. In fact, the entire Muslim Ummah is obligated to love Imam al-Hussein. Traditions that are commands from Rasulullah in regards to supporting Imam al-Hussein, in regards to loving Imam al-Hussein, are found in the books of scholars who are not from the school of the Ahl Shia. You look, for example, At-Tabarani, Allama At-Tabarani, one of the most revered scholars from the Ahl Sunnah, in his kitab Mu'jam al-Kabir, he states a narration whereby Rasulullah says, he says, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Man ahabbani faqad, Man ahabbani فَلْيُحِبْ هَذَيْنِ يعني الحسن والحسين. Anyone who claims to love me, anyone who professes love towards me, must love Hassan and Hussein. هذا Tabarani. Furthermore than that, Al-Hakim al-Nishapuri, one of the greatest scholars from the Mukhalifin, and Ibn Majah in his Sahih, which is considered to be one of the Sihah as-Sitta. Both these scholars mention a tradition which is narrated by Abu Huraira, where Rasulullah says, Abu Huraira is the narrator of the hadith, he says, قال Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Ehna, we have added wa alihi wa alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, because the alihi is not involved in the original text. Either way, he says, قال Rasulullah, Man ahabba al-Hasani wal-Husayn faqad ahabbani wa man abghadahuma faqad abghadani. Rasulullah says, whoever loves Hassan and Hussein loves me, and whoever bears enmity towards Hassan and Hussein has bared enmity towards me. For the command to portray and to express your love towards Sayyid al-Shuhada is a command from Rasulullah, who any person on the face of this earth who says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, his wajib obligation is to show his support and his love for Imam Hassan wal Hussein. For where is the disunity? More than that, the first time, or one of the first times, or more correctly, one of the many times where Rasulullah wept for Imam al-Hussein during his lifetime, is recorded in the books of non-Shia scholars. Again, referring back to Tabarani, Mu'jam al-Kabir, he narrates or he records a tradition from Aisha, where she says, to paraphrase this narration in English, Aisha says that Rasulullah came into my house and sat in my room and began to receive revelation from Angel Jibra'il while he was in this pure state of receiving a wahi. Imam al-Hussein comes into the house and he sits on the lap of Rasulullah. At this time, Jibra'il tells Rasulullah, Inna ibnaka hadha sayuqtal min ba'dik. Jibreel says to Rasulullah, indeed this son of yours will be killed after your demise. The tradition goes on to say, who is the narrator? Aisha. He says, فَجِبْرَائِيل فَمَدَّ يَدَى جِبْرَائِيل فَمَدَّ جِبْرَائِيل عَفْوًا فَمَدَّ جِبْرَائِيل يَدَهُ فَأَتَى بِتُرْبَةٍ بَيْضَاءٍ وَقَالَ لَهُ سَيُقْتَلْ ابْنُكَ فِي هَذَا الْأَرْضِ. Jibra'il raises his hand or his wings towards Karbala. The wahi is where? In Medina. And then he brings a part of this pure dust from Karbala and he brings it in front of Rasulullah. He says to him, it is on this earth that your son will be killed. وَإِنَّهَا تُسَمَّى التَّفْ. This land is called Taf, another name of Karbala. Aisha continues by saying, فَلَمَّا ذَهَبَ جِبْرَائِيلُ عِنْدَهُ كَانَ الْتُرَابُ في يد الرسول وهو يبكي على الحسين. When Jibra'il left, Rasulullah held this turba on his hand and began to weep for Sayyid al-Shuhada. to commemorate Majalis al-Aza is a Sunnah Nabawiyya, which the entire Muslim Ummah is commanded to obey and to walk in this seerah. Ba'ad, is there something more even more explicit than this? Ibn Hajar, one of the scholars from the Mukhalifin, in his book Al-Isaba, records a tradition which is narrated by a companion by the name Anas ibn al-Harith, where he says, we were in Masjid al-Nabawi one day when Rasulullah stood up after delivering his khutbah. Yani, what seems apparent from the tradition is that Rasulullah completed his khutbah, sat down, and then he stands up again, and he's holding Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam al-Hussein is in his arms. He says to the mahshar of the Ansar and the Muhajirin who are there in Masjid al-Nabawi, he lifts Imam al-Hussein up and he says, Inna hadha ibni shayuktal fi ardhim min ardhil Iraq. Ala faman shahida dhalika minkum falyansurhu. Ibn Majah or Ibn al-Hajar says, on this narration recorded by Anas ibn al-Harith, he says Rasulullah stood up in Masjid al-Nabawi in front of the mahshar of the Ansar and the Muhajirin. He lifted Imam Hussein up and he said to them, O people, this son of mine Hussein will be killed on a faraway land known as Karbala, or in a faraway earth land in Iraq. He tells his companions, if any one of you live long enough to see that the Ummah has gathered around the killing of Imam Hussein, what does he say? فَلْيَنْصُرْهُ. Then ulama of Arabic grammar and ulama of usul will tell you, when afa sababiyya and the lam al-illa is added to a verb which is in its present continuous tense, yansurhu fi'l mudari. Those of you who have studied Arabic grammar, before that the fa and the lam, ulama of usul tell you that when this lam is added to a fi'l mudari, فَهُوَ يَدِلُّ عَلَى الْوُجُوبِ. It becomes obligatory upon anyone who saw Imam al-Hussein under siege like that in Karbala to support him. Anas ibn al-Harith, on the 61st year after Hijrah, leaves Kufa because he says, I remembered this tradition of Rasulullah when I was in Medina, where he said, Man shahida dhalika minkum falyansur. Anas ibn Harith, based on this narration, traveled towards Karbala and was one of the Sahabi of Rasulullah who was blessed with Shahada under Sayyid al-Shuhada. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In reality, commemoration of the Majalis of Sayyid al-Shuhada is the biggest factor that plays for the unity of all Muslims to actualize. There is no revolution based or fueled by ideology such as the revolution of Imam al-Hussein across the passage of time since the history of mankind began, where people from different walks of life and different backgrounds united under one banner, that banner of Imam al-Hussein. Come to Karbala, you will see that the Arab, full-blooded Arab such as Qais ibn Mashhar al-Saydawi is standing shoulder to shoulder with a person from African descent such as John. Come to Karbala, you will find that people from different madhabs have become united under one flag. You have a person such as Abis, who is staunch in his wilayah for Amirul Mu'mineen, standing side by a person who was former Uthmani by the likes of Zuhair ibn Kain, standing side by a companion who was previously Christian like Wahab. Which other revolution in history do you find where people have rallied together under one banner like this? It is only in the tent of Imam al-Hussein in defense of Tawheed that you see the elders of the community are united with the youth of the community, where a person such as Habib ibn Madahir in his 70s, Anath ibn Harith in his 80s, stands side by side with the youth such as Qasim who is 13. In reality, the only people who have objections and are fearful of the commemoration of the majalis of Imam al-Hussein are the munafiqeen. Those people who did not have enough courage to be enemies, open enemies of Islam. Those people who did not have courage to attack Islam from the outside. So they wore the dresses of the Muslims, they wore the dresses of the Muslim scholars, and they decided to corrupt the pure fiber of Islam from within by disseminating baseless ideologies such as these. The grounds for the entire Muslim Ummah to unite is Sayyid al-Shuhada. In fact, during the time of Allama al-Amini, rahmatullah alayh, author of the book Al-Ghadir, Mawsu'at al-Ghadir, 12 or 13 volume encyclopedia, where he has recounted and has narrated the event of Ghadir in its true depth. During his time, as at the status of a marja taqleed, alim from the ulama of the school of Ahlul Bayt. He is in Karbala al-Muqaddas on the day of Ashura, and as was the trend of the ulama at that time, they would sit by the gates of the city and they would watch all the Muslims coming in and performing azah and giving their condolences to Sayyid al-Shuhada. While Allama al-Amini was sitting there, there happened to be a group of the Nawasib. Not everyone who is from the Mukhalif is a Nawasib. However, what seems apparent from this historical narration is that a group of the Nawasib come and they sit next to Allama al-Amini as he's watching the group of the Azaz, as he's watching the group of the Azadaris and the Matamis coming in. While they are seated next to Allama al-Amini, first a mawkib of people come in who are crying with their loudest voices, wailing and weeping. These Nawasib look at Allama al-Amini in order to mock him, and they say, is this the type of Islam that Rasulullah wanted? Is this what your madhab teaches you? Allama Amini is quiet. After that, a mawkib passes where a group of Matamis are inside, beating their heads and beating their chests in the most passionate way, shouting, "Oh, wa Husayna, wa Sayyida," throwing dust on their head. Allama al-Amini's tears are flowing down his cheeks. The Nawasib sitting next to him begin to mock the madhab of Ali Muhammad, begin to mock the Azadari, begin to mock the Matamis. They come to Allama Amini and they say, what a shame. Is this type of disgraceful action what Rasulullah wanted from Islam? Allama al-Amini, ghira of the madhab catches and overcomes him. He looks towards the Nawasib, but in a very calm tone, in a very non-violent manner, non-aggressive manner. He looks towards this Nawasib and he says, as long as we continue to uphold the ma'atam and the commemoration of Ashura, nobody will have the audacity to deny and to try and cover up what happened on 61 AH. You people will not have the audacity to come and cover up the crimes of Yazid. He goes on to say, it is our mistake that on Eid al-Ghadir we did not hold matam. It is our mistake on Eid al-Ghadir we did not hold majalis, because despite there being 100,000 witnesses, the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen went away from. لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين. بارك الله فيكم. فأحبائي أنتم, when you come to this Mubarak center and you participate in the Majalis Azah of Sayyid al-Shuhada, when you come here and you recite your poetry, when you come here in your lines and you perform your matam, when you come here and you weep over the tragedy of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you are counted as a direct supporter of the revolution of Imam al-Hussein. It is through these Majalis that the Madlumiyya of Sayyid al-Shuhada is given a voice. It is through these Majalis that the message of Imam al-Hussein is kept alive. It is through these majalis that the entire mankind from the time of Adam until the day of judgment will be given a remembrance for the values and the philosophies for which Imam al-Hussein gave his life. Enter through this majlis al-aza, you make the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein eternal. Hence you are counted as a direct supporter, Nasir or Ansar of the revolution of Imam al-Hussein. Enter when you come here and you shed your tears for Imam al-Hussein, you make sure through your weeping and your wailing that pure blood which was spilt on the land of Karbala, you will not let this affair end. Enter when you come here, year after year, generation after generation, when you raise your children on the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you are making a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada will remain alive till Qiyamah. Like the poet says, Abad wallah ya Zahra ma ninsa Husayna. Abad wallah, by Allah, never, never pledge to say the Zahra shall we ever forget Hussein, no matter how the times and the generations change. Enter this majlis aza, majlis barakah, majlis khair. The mind cannot comprehend the ajr that is granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The person comes forward and poses ishkal. How is it that by a single tear that is wept for Imam al-Hussein that Allah gives Jannah and Allah forgives sin? Ya Habibi Sayyid al-Shuhada is the madhar of the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to see the mercy of Allah, come in through the doors of Imam al-Hussein. One time Ja'far ibn Affan, a companion of Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, comes into the house of the Imam. The Imam tells him, قَدْ بَلَغَنِي أَنَّكَ تَنْشِدْ فِي الْحُسَيْنِ وَتُجِيدُ فِي. He says that it has reached me, news has reached me that you recite poetry for Imam al-Hussein and you excel in it. Ja'far says, Na'am, bala ya ibn Rasulullah. The Imam says, Anshid. Yani the Imam says, recite a poem for me. Ja'far ibn Affan says, فَأَنْشَدْتُ لَهُ شِعْرًا لِلْحُسَيْنِ وَكَانَ يَبْكِي وَبَكَى مَنْ حَوْلَهُ حَتَّى صَارَتْ دُمُوعَهُ تَجْرِي عَلَى خَدِّي وَلَحْيَتِي. He says, I recited a poem for Imam al-Sadiq and the Imam began to cry. Everybody around the Imam began to cry. He says, until I saw the tears of the Masoom Imam come down his cheeks onto his beard. What does Imam al-Sadiq say to Ja'far? He says, Wallah, Masoom Imam taking a qasam. He says, Wallah, لَقَدْ شَهَدْتُ مَلَائِكَةَ اللَّهِ الْمُكَرَّبُونَ هَا هُنَا. Imam al-Sadiq tells to Ja'far, Wallah, by Allah, at this place right now where you have recited this poetry for Imam al-Hussein, Imam says that I've seen the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descend down. Not only the normal angels of Allah, he says, Malaikat Allah al-Mukarraboon. O lovers of Ahlul Bayt, do you know who are the Malaikat al-Mukarraboon? The ones who lift the Arsh, the one who ensure that the Arsh is established and firm. The likes of Jibreel and Mikael and Israfil. Imam al-Sadiq says, Shahadtu Malaikat Allah al-Mukarraboon wa bakaw kama bakayna bal akthar. He says they wept, these malaika began to cry the way we cry. Rather they wept more than we did. Enter Habibi, when you sit over here in this Imam Bargha in Dar es Salaam, do not think that you are crying by yourself. This is the hadith of Imam al-Sadiq. Enter when you sit here and you weep for Sayyid al-Shuhada. The Malaikat al-Mukarraboon, Jibreel comes here and weeps with you. Do not take the value of, do not underestimate the value of these majalis. Tawfiq ilahi. I say to myself before I say to anybody here from the mu'mineen, it is tawfiq to be present in majalis such as these where we need to perform sajdatul shukr. Work hard during these 12 days to participate in every form and manner to establish the aza of Imam al-Hussein. It is through these majalis, through these weeping, through this nawha, through this marthia, that you sow the seeds of the love of wilaya in your heart. And cultivate this love. Actualize this love by implementing the values and the lessons for which Imam al-Hussein gave his life in Karbala. Hatta till you become an ambassador for the goals and the values of Imam al-Hussein. The starting point, the impetus, the motivation, that desire to change, that divine power that allows a person to change, is incurred or received through majalis such as these. Ba'ad majalis al-Hussein is not an issue that is restricted to the dunya, but even in the mahshar on the day of judgment, we will come out of our graves crying, Ya Hussein. There is a tradition narrated in Biharul Anwar by Allama al-Majlisi, rahmatullah alayh, where he narrates Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam states that on the day of judgment, when people are raised from their graves in the mahshar and they are standing in their coffins and the mizan is in front of us and the books have been raised and the Jannah and Jahannam is apparent, he says at this time Sayyid al-Zahra will come through the mahshar. Entire mankind is being told, lower your gaze, for the daughter of Habibullah is walking through. Rasulullah says that a kubbah, a dome of nur, will be placed in the mahshar for Sayyid al-Zahra. She will sit under that mahshar, and when she looks around, she will see the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Rasulullah says that the head of Imam al-Hussein, the severed head, will be brought towards Sayyid al-Zahra. His beard will be covered in blood. At this time, the traditions say, فَتُصِيحَ الزَّهْرَا وَوَلَدَا وَحُسَيْنَا. The tradition tells us that Zahra will cry out, Ya Hussein, oh my son Hussein. Do you know what it means for Zahra alayha salam to cry? The tradition tells us that when she begins to weep because of the pain in her voice, فَتَسْعَكَ الْمَلَائِكَ كُلُّهَا. Tas'ak means that the malaika will begin to cry until the malaika faint. Even in the mahshar there will be a majlis al-aza. And as we begin these nights of weeping until Eid al-Zahra, on a night like this, lovers of Ahlul Bayt from every corner of the world have got together to say, Ya Hussein. It was on a night like this the mourning ceremonies commemorate in Karbala al-Muqaddas. The flag changing ceremony has been completed. After Salatul Maghrib, the red flag from the Qubba of Sayyid al-Shuhada has been changed and replaced with a black one. The days of wearing black and the days of mourning have befallen upon us. Ahibai, I wish to begin these blessed days of Imam al-Hussein by remembering the musibah of Sayyid al-Zahra. Just like on the day of Qiyamah, we will hold the Majlis Azah for Imam al-Hussein. The narrations tell us that even in the Barzakh there is Majlis al-Azah. One of the traditions tell us, as is narrated by the poet, that on the day of Ashura, after the Asr of Ashura, when the ruh of Imam al-Hussein is lifted up to the heavens, the tradition tells us that Imam al-Hussein meets with his mother Sayyid al-Zahra, and they are with Rasulullah. Majlis al-Azah in the
عالم البرزخ. Sayyida Zahra looks at Rasulullah. She says, Abata, Abata, Ya Rasulallah. Oh Father, oh Rasulallah. If only you had seen what they done to me after you died. She says, Abata, Ya Rasulallah. They came and they crushed me. The Taghut came and crushed me between the door and the wall. Abata, I had a son, Muhsin. This Muhsin was shaheed even before he was born. Allah, Allah. Sayyid al-Shuhada comes forward. He says, Rasulallah, Rasulallah. Just like the way my mother had an infant Muhsin, I also had a baby, Abdullah al-Radhi. Ali al-Asghar. He says, Rasulallah, if only you were there to see how they quenched his thirst with an arrow. Zahra looks at Rasulullah, she says, Abata, Abata, Ya Rasulullah. After you left the dunya, the Taghut came and began to kick me. Abata, he kicked me until he broke my rib. Allah, Allah. Sayyid al-Shuhada looks at Zahra. He says, Wa Umma wa Zahra. They broke your one rib. Come to Karbala and see how they broke my ribs with the horse. Rasulullah looks into the heavens and he says, Ya Allah, ahkum baynana wa bayna man dhalama wa katala ahla bayti. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa la'natullahi ala a'daihim min al-'ani ila qiyami yawmiddin. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.